Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts thinks every football field should be named after Pitbull. Not just the FIU field. I don't know what it's called now, but it's going to be named after Pitbull, I learned today. Lenny's in favor of all dog rappers. So Snoop Dogg Field also, he'll take that. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by a longtime friend of mine. I've gone on his podcast before to talk Seahawks. He covers the Seahawks for field goals, which is excellent SB Nation blog. He is in a extremely active, long-running group chat with me and Danny Kelly. Jacson Bevens, the host of the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Welcome to the show. Are you ready to preview the NFC West with me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even if my favorite team didn't play in this division, I think it's one of the most interesting and most competitive divisions in the NFL. So I'm really looking forward to it.
It's also one of the newsiest right now because as of this recording or taping on Tuesday afternoon, Brandon Aiyuk is still a San Francisco 49er. Rumors are swirling about him, potential destinations. I've been working the texts, trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, so we're going to talk Niners at the end of the show on the off chance something breaks. And we're going to talk about all of the various possibility, not every possibility, but it's really down to like 3 or 4 things and what that would mean for the San Francisco 49ers because it would be massive. And also after the show, my friend Sam Schwartzstein, who works for Amazon for Prime Video, he is the creator of the new Kickoff, is going to swing by and we're going to talk about what the kickoff might look like, which I'm very excited about. You can also watch a full video on YouTube where I kind of break down the new rule, but that's all later. For now, we are doing the NFC West. I was going to start with the Niners. Now we're going to talk about the Niners at the end. We're going to talk about the Rams first. I hope that's all right. I am Absolutely. a known Rams trader. By the way, preseason games this weekend. Our first preseason game is against the Dallas Cowboys. So if you want to watch Stetson Bennett versus Trey Lance and hear the dulcet tones of me and the Andrews, you can probably catch that somewhere. So let's start with the Rams offense, if that's okay, because I feel like last year we did not respect this team. I don't even just mean Seahawks fans. I mean everybody. They were written off. This is going to be another lost season. The defense was extremely young, and there was like a lot of these question marks about Matthew Stafford coming off of like it was like an elbow injury and whether or not he was going to retire. And
the vibes were bad. It's easy to forget how bad those vibes were at the end of the 2022 season.
Terrible vibes. Cooper Kupp was injured at the beginning of the season. The world did not know about the existence of Puka Nacua. And then they came in and they first they beat the Seahawks week 1. Puka Nacua put over 100 yards. And then the offense was awesome, particularly in the second half of the season. I've talked about this a lot this offseason, how great they were. I have them projected as a top 10 offense this year. We talked about Matthew Stafford earlier this week being a potential MVP candidate. So let's start here. Like, Jackson, what do you think watching this Rams offense last year makes it so hard to defend this current version of it?
Yeah, we talk about offenses so much. We revolve around either the scheme or the quarterback, and oftentimes forget how important it is to be able to marry these things. It's one thing to have a high ceiling scheme and something that's really cutting edge, like Sean McVay obviously does, but we saw what happens when you don't have the quarterback to execute it. It's not a plug and play offense. I do think there are offenses like Kyle Shanahan's that are a softer landing spot for quarterbacks who don't have otherworldly talent, like I believe Matthew Stafford does. But that's not the case for the Rams offense. It is brilliant, it is precise, but it requires high level quarterback play. And I think Stafford is making a late career push to be a Hall of Famer. I think he's playing the best football of his career. And we saw that. We had Jordan Rodriguez on, who's one of the best beat reporters in the NFL, covers the Rams. We had her on our show before the season last year to do an NFC West preview. And I said, it feels like a 2-team division with the 49ers and the Seahawks. And she didn't even push back on it at the time. And then here we are. They're 9-8. They almost win a playoff game. And they look like a playoff team again this year.
Yeah, there's so many things. You talked about sort of what happens when you have like this creative, very difficult to stop scheme and then putting in an elite quarterback. And then I think with the Rams, on top of that, you have elite skill player, not just elite skill players. And, the Niners obviously have the best skill players in the NFL, but you have skill players in Los Angeles who are just so perfect for the identity of this offense. I mean, Puka Nacua was like built in a lab to be a Ram, right?
Yep.
Because he can block, he can make difficult catches over the middle of the field. He's so good at sitting in zones and getting open. And he was also, so pivotal not only in Kupp's absence, but in the second half of this year, you saw some changes early on with the Rams offense, but the second half of the year was really when you saw this pivot to their identity and what I think, and we're here to do a preview, will be the identity this year, which is they were still on 11 personnel offense. Mm-hmm. They ran 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, 95% of the time, which is most of any team in the NFL. And in doing that, they face a ton of nickel near the top of the NFL, but they'll run it into nickel. Like they face a ton of light boxes, and they've got their wide receivers, but because their wide receivers are so good at blocking, because, they come out with these condensed formations, they were able to execute this downhill duo run game at an extremely high level, which, for those who don't know what that looks like, essentially you're trying to create double teams, but you're at least one wide receiver is getting in there and getting dirty, right? Getting on a DB. And I mean, Nacua, like he looks, I want to say he looks like a tight end out there, but he's a big boy. And the fact that they can come out here and defenses are so afraid of them throwing the ball, and then they've just got this like physical bruising downhill run game, and they've invested so much in the interior of the offensive line, it's really, really hard to defend.
Yeah, it really is. I think Puka Nacua has some George Kittle to him. I mean, he's a football player who plays wide receiver, and he just loves every part of that game. But he's also really excellent at, I think, a skill that is super valuable in the modern NFL when a lot of teams are playing too high safeties now. You have to be able to win over the middle of the field in that 15 to 25 yard range, and that's one of the toughest throws for a quarterback to make. You have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at making that throw, but that's also a difficult route to run because you are occupying the zones of multiple defenders while you're running it. And in that Seahawks game, where I think he had like 15 catches in his NFL debut, I mean, it was just sail routes and crossers all game long. And if you can do that well, you put so much pressure, not just on the defender that's initially guarding that player, but on 2 or 3 others as he crosses their zones too. It creates a lot of confusion. And I think the brilliance of Sean McVay's scheme is, it's not, hey, look at all of these cool formations we have. It's like, hey, look at our one formation that we can do a lot out of. Like now you don't just get to look at our personnel and say, okay, we're bringing in our jumbo package, or we're bringing in dime, or whatever it is. Any play they run can be run out of that 11 personnel. And that makes it really, really hard on defensive coordinators to make their own personnel decisions. And like I said, I think that's the brilliance of it.
Yes, it's so true. He calls it the illusion of complexity.
That's
right. Everything looks the same. It's the same players on the field. Anyone can be throwing a block, catching a pass. It's very, very difficult to defend. And I think it could be even more difficult to defend this year, because another thing they started doing in the second half of last season. So from weeks 10 through the wild card game, the Rams used the pistol formation, which has been much discussed this offseason amongst NFL nerds at an extremely high rate. And they were 16% of the time, which is a lot. And they were extremely good at it. And what makes this such a problem is, you and I were talking about sort of like how, the Rams, what they do is they present the same look and do a bunch of different things out of it. In the pistol, it creates an even more indecision for defenses because they can run and pass at the same rate. In fact, by the way, I was looking at their run pass rates. So when the Rams were in the gun, they were 85% pass. When they were under center, they were nearly 70% run. Pistol was much more evenly split for them. 56% run, 44% pass last year. That's a problem, because you're already facing this group. You don't know what's going to do. You don't know if the receivers are blocking or running routes or whatever. You don't know really whether it's going to be run pass, that kind of thing. And then they're in this formation where, because the running back is behind the quarterback, you go in either direction. They can get to much more of their pass menu out of it. It just makes things even more confusing for these defenders who are facing an already unbelievably confusing offense.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I didn't know about their splits within pistol. I was familiar with them under center and in shotgun, but the illusion of complexity is not just like a cool buzzword. It's not just a phrase that he uses. It when you're on defense, and especially at the NFL level, you are in a reactive position. It's really hard to dictate terms in the modern NFL, especially with the increased penalties on contact away from the ball. And so you're looking for tells. That is like your lifeline is, okay, every single team has tendencies and you're doing everything you can to pick those up pre-snap. And when you're getting those looks, especially out of pistol, and it's a coin flip, that makes it really, really difficult, especially on the second level of the defense, to figure out where they need to be and who they're picking up. So yeah, McVay is on my Mount Rushmore of favorite coaches, with John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, and Andy Reid. Like, those are my 4 favorite coaches in the NFL. And, and it's precisely for this reason. It's also just on a personal level, his ability to bounce back from that atrocious 2022 year where he was golden boy and could do no wrong and was changing the NFL. And then all of a sudden he was contemplating retirement and just felt so overwhelmed. And it's a reminder, like, the NFL is the fastest learning organism on planet Earth. Every team's got dozens of coaches grinding 80 hours of film to figure you out. And if you can't adapt, you will die. And his ability to bounce back last season blew me away.
Yeah, just the reinvention of this offense is, we talked about, again, that sort of more duo-oriented downhill run game. They used to be more of the wide zone rushing attack, but there's just been so many different versions of that, right? You had the original McVay offense, then you had the Matthew Stafford Super Bowl year where he was more just in the gun, spraying things around, you get more empty. Last year, you got to this with the run game, and I think that sort of begs the question of kind of what's next, right? I wouldn't be surprised if they lean even more into the pistol. There has been talk about them wanting to get away from, maybe have. You mentioned Jordan Rodriguez. I heard talk about, we might be seeing more multiple tight end sets. We'll see. But I already think the thing about that 11 personnel grouping and their ability to be so physical and run out of it is just there are very few defenses that are equipped to stop it, because if you can't play, you got to be in your sub packages facing them because of what they can do in the pass game. And there are very few defenses in their sub packages who can stop this rushing attack, which I guess brings me to what could go wrong. For me, Jacson, really, it's just injuries. Stafford did get hurt last year. He's obviously had a history of injuries. Cooper Kupp was banged up last season and is on the wrong side of 30. And then this offensive line, I just heard out of camp, there's the tackles, both Alaric Jackson and Rob Havestein have been battling injuries. They're very deep in the interior of the offensive line, a little bit less so at tackle. To me, that would be the only concern I have about this Rams offense, is any lingering injuries for any of those parts.
Yeah, certainly as far as the offense is concerned, that's it. I mean, they showed that they can even survive the loss of Cooper Kupp, who put up, a top 5 season of all time the previous year. And so it is. But I think that's true of every team in the NFL. Every fan base complains about their offensive line. The fact of the matter is there's just not 150 great offensive linemen in this world. And so every team deals with it. The injury rates are super high at that position. So, that's a vulnerability for every team. And really the only potential crack in the armor outside of a Stafford injury that I see. My bigger concern with the Rams is the defense.
Okay, let's get to it. Yeah, because I do think that the injury thing with the Rams, if the offense is anything less than top 10, that's when you start to get worried, because
they weren't great on defense last year.
They were not
and
great.
They had Aaron Donald.
Yeah, so they were about 20th, 21st in most. Which honestly, this was the 4th youngest defense in football last year. The fact that they were even competent is a huge credit to Raheem Morris, a big part of why
Absolutely.
I think he is now a head coach. But Aaron Donald's gone, man. And you got great rookie seasons out of Byron Young and Kobe Turner. You double dip on defense at the top of the draft. You're taking Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, teammates. Everybody's really pumped. exciting young players. They all seem to fit together. I believe all of that. I also think people do not appreciate what it's going to do to take Aaron Donald, what the effects that taking Aaron Donald out of that defensive line could have, especially early on.
Yeah, I think this defense could be pretty bad in 2024. I think we're going to see a lot of points in Rams games. But I also could see it as something because of their youth and because they've never had to really in the last decade figure out how to play without Aaron Donald. It's going to take some figuring out. I could see this defense being a lot better in November and December than they are in September and October. Yeah. So the question just becomes, how many losses do you absorb during that first half of the season as you figure it out? If you figure it out, they use their first 2 picks on teammates from Florida State, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk. Fisk appears to be having a phenomenal camp. 2025 and beyond, I see that as like a really great investment for them. But man, they have gotten away with a lot of stuff on defense over the years because they've created so much pressure, and specifically pressure up the middle. Pressure up the middle, even though it results in fewer sacks and fewer tackles for loss, it does more to disrupt what an offense wants to do than pressure around the edge does, because you can roll away from pressure around the edge, but you can't step into your throw, or the running back can't build up momentum because there's pressure up the middle. It destroys plays. So they were 22nd in defensive DVOA last year. I'd be surprised if they're any higher than that this year. And I think that's going to be the biggest concern for them.
Your point about the pressure up the middle too, like Kobe Turner had a ton of, I think he led all rookies in sacks last year, if I remember. But again, I'm telling you, like, even if it doesn't get charted as a double team, every down, the offensive line is thinking about one human being. And it's funny. Yeah.
Kobe's going to have at least an extra half blocker on every play this year than he did last year.
Byron Young had a good year, especially early on, but he's kind of like a speed, a little bit more of a finesse guy, which pairs well with Verse, I think. Yeah, but he also benefited heavily from the presence of Donald. In fact, you mentioned DVOA. FTN does like what percentage of a team's sacks come from different positions. So the Rams had more percentage of their sacks from the interior of the defensive line than any team in the NFL. It's probably going to shift a bit. That said, I like the picks. I mean, Fisk is an athletic freak. I think, again, that pairing of him and Verse with Young and Turner, it's really nice. It just might take a second, especially defense. The linebacker is one of the weaker areas in the Rams roster. They do have Ernest Jones, who they have not given a new contract. He's in a contract year, but after him, there's no depth. I do think I like the veteran additions they made in the secondary, signing Cam Curl, who's a really versatile, excellent tackling safety from Washington. You bring back old friend Darius Williams, who's kind of just like one of those competent to good NFL corners, free agents. Kind of like how he reminds me a little bit of DJ Reed from Seattle, who's been awesome in New York. So I like that. Trey White, we'll see what he's got left in the tank, from Buffalo. And then you got some youth around them. They drafted Cam Kinchins out of Miami. Who's kind of a fun player.
I like Kinchins a lot coming out. He was the guy I kind of had my eye on for sure.
I think I just there's no, I guess there are some good veterans. There are young players, but they don't really have like a star back there.
There's no one that's scaring the offensive coordinator on that defense.
Right. And if you have a great pass rush, that's fine. But if the pass rush takes a dip, lost Aaron Donald, I'm not looking at that secondary and saying they'll be fine. They're going to buy them a ton of time, because there are sort of holes that I think good offensive coordinators can go after.
I agree. Also, it's worth mentioning that they were just atrocious on special teams last year. They had the 6th worst special teams DVOA in history last year. So that's got to, just by random chance, that's got to regress to be better. But that cost them last year too. I don't expect them to be great all of a sudden, but it has to be better.
No, that's an issue. They were bad at everything. One thing, because I was just looking at this for the preseason, because special teams matters a lot in the preseason. So they did draft a kicker. We'll see if they're better there. But a lot of the problem too was return coverage, because they got this punter who can boom it, but people were I think they were near the bottom of the NFL in net yards per punt, because they were giving up so many big returns. So that was that was rough. And it's been rough since like the Hecker Zierlein days. You remember those? So
I sure do.
yeah, I guess I think like the case for the Rams this year really is if the offense is top 3 unit, and I think that's possible. So
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I hope people are like hearing this and like we in the Seattle contingent are major Stafford McVay respecters. I think that's coming across, right?
Yes, I hope it is, because it's true.
I do think without getting to the Seahawks defense side of it, we talked a little bit about how the offense and how awesome they were. And you make, I think, a great point about, defenses being reactive. And the Ravens defense all year was not reactive. They were really like dictating to offenses. But the Rams gave them the business. And that actually worries me a little bit. Now, I mean, not necessarily, I think the Seahawks defense is going to look very different from the Ravens defense for a number of reasons. But to me, that just captures how unique this offense is and how hard they are to defend.
Oh, yeah. No, it's going to be a really stressful prep week for every defensive coordinator they face, just like it has been for the last, 8 years now.
Okay, so actually, let's just do the Seahawks here.
Let's get this out of the way.
Okay, so you've been to camp, right? Like, let's start with the vibes report before we get into sort of get into depth on this team.
Okay, so on the show we've been running through the Seahawks beat. We're fortunate to have really great relationship with everyone that's covering the Seahawks team, and they really do a wonderful job. And the vibes are very different. They're good. Which, I mean, if vibes are bad in the first week of training camp, like you're really in trouble. Like you're expecting, I mean, even, the Giants have good vibes right now. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? But it is different. And I think the thing that has frustrated both you and I over the years is, vibes have been a specialty of Pete Carroll, but like attention to detail has been awful. Yeah. They've been so sloppy, so unprepared, so undisciplined, and it just shows up. And at some point the vibes run out. And we've kind of seen that happen over the last few years since the LOB. And what we're hearing out of camp right now is it is way more physical. Like they're not breaking up the skirmishes. They're letting them fight. And Mike McDonald basically has a rule: keep your hand open when swinging at the helmet, but like don't break your hand. But like they're letting them fight, and they're letting them tackle to the ground, and they're doing things with a level of physicality. They're going to have a joint practice this year, which is not, for some reason Pete Carroll never did, which always surprised me since he was so big on inter-practice competition. So the vibes are different for sure. But it feels a lot more intense to everybody that's there. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Let's start with the defense, because I think this is why Pete Carroll's no longer the head coach of the Seahawks. Like this defense has been bad for 5 years. I mean, it's been near the bottom of the NFL in DVOA efficiency, anything. For quite some time now. And they've tried different combinations of players. They've brought guys back. They've drafted guys. They've tried different schemes. And it just hasn't worked. So you bring in Mike McDonald, who we alluded to this, the hottest defensive play caller in football. And this is, with him, you bring a lot of changes in personnel too, that I have to think are sort of based on his vision for this defense. Up front, so they spent the first draft pick on Byron Murphy Jr., who you can tell me what you've been hearing, but I've been hearing looks amazing in camp. Yes, lots of excitement amongst the staff around him. So the defensive line on the interior, you got Draymond Jones, Byron Murphy Jr., Jaron Reed, who was like one of the few bright spots last year, weirdly. Leonard Williams, Jonathan Hankins. Again, this is a very multiple defense, so I'll be curious to see, what kind of the snaps look like and how they're dispersed in the different roles for them. Linebacker is the biggest change. Everybody's gone. So you're going with Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson from Buffalo. And then at edge, you got Chinna Nwosu coming back from injury. His absence was sorely felt last year. And I guess Boye Mafe is probably who you would say is the edge, other opposite.
Yeah.
Outside linebacker. Corner is pretty similar. Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, Trey Brown, pardon me, Michael Jackson. And then safety, again, a lot of change. They keep Julian Love, actually signed him to an extension. You bring in Rayshawn Jenkins, Kayvon Wallace, Quandre Diggs is gone, now in Tennessee. Jamal Adams is gone. So I guess, let me ask you this. All these changes, do you think they point to this is what this defense is going to look like, or they're prioritizing a certain position, or like what are the decisions they've made around personnel tell you about what this defense might look like this season?
It tells me that this is a tryout year, outside of Witherspoon and now Love and Leonard Williams, pretty much no one on this team is guaranteed a spot next year. And so I think this year is a diagnostic year for Mike Macdonald. When he went to Michigan and took over a bad defense and turned them into a great defense, it took 2 years. When he went back to Baltimore, they were 25th in points allowed the year that he took over. It took them 2 years to get to number one. I do think this is a 2-year plan, and a lot of these guys are playing for their future in Seattle, and he's going to see who can do what he asked them to do. And, I don't feel like the defense this last couple of years, like it was really bad. It was a stinky meal, but I don't think it's because there were bad ingredients. I think there's a lot of talent on this defense. I think it was cooked poorly, and they're bringing in Gordon Ramsay. And so, you've got these locally sourced organic ingredients, and it's time to see, if you can cook them better. And so I don't think, outside of Love, who it sounds like Macdonald really, really likes and sees a lot of potential in, and that seems to be reflected in the fact that they just assigned him to an extension. Apparently he loves Tariq Woolen, who such a curious player because he was really second team All Pro as a rookie, late round draft pick. He'd only played 1 year at corner in college. And he was just out there, had no idea what he was doing, admitted as much, and just playing off of instinct and athleticism. And then last year he kind of played hurt all year and was bad, and got benched.
But like bad at some things and still like really like he's
still 6'4", 210, runs a 4.4. Right. Like that didn't go away, but like he had a separated shoulder, he didn't tackle. And that was teams targeted that. Instead of threatening him deep, they would throw it to the receiver in front of him and say, tackle me.
Or run at him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, if you're boxing and you can tell that the other person has a hurt shoulder, you're attacking that side of the body. You're going to make them use that shoulder to defend themselves. And that's what defenses did with Tariq Woolen. So he's going to be really interesting to see, but I do see him as a part of the future.
Do you think that the Seahawks will not be, they'll primarily be in nickel, maybe a little big nickel, but is Witherspoon, do you think, primarily going to play in the slot, or do you think they'll play him outside?
Mostly slot. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about with the McVay offense. We were just seeing so much more 11 personnel nowadays. Nickel has kind of become the new base defense in the NFL. With Macdonald, it's a little bit tougher to tell looking at what he did at Michigan and Baltimore because he moved guys all over the place, and he's trying to get them to do that this year. We had Greg Bell, who covers the Seahawks for the News Tribune, actually on our show this morning. And I asked him, I said, if you knew everything that you know currently about football, but didn't know who any of these players were, didn't know their draft capital, didn't know their contract situation, didn't know their names, you just showed up and watched this first week of Seahawks training camp, who's the best player on this team? And he didn't. I mean, I wasn't finished asking the question. He said Devin Witherspoon. And so I think Macdonald is going to like that and use him as many different ways as he can. We saw how effective he was as a blitzer last year. He's just an attack dog out there. He's not just a sticky coverage guy. He likes to hit. He does on defense what Puka Nacua does as a wide receiver on offense.
He's looking for contact. I like, if like you said, they're going to be if they're facing the Rams and they're 11 personnel and they're in their sub, so they're in nickel. I like Witherspoon playing, certainly in the slot, but I like him getting his nose dirty. I mean, he is an unbelievable tackling corner for his size. He hits so hard. He plays with so much physicality. I think he's got a little bit to clean up in coverage, particularly man coverage, but Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world for me, and I'll be curious to see how McDonald deploys him and takes advantage of his versatility without putting too much on his plate. You know, I see him compared sometimes to Kyle Hamilton, but there's such different players, such different body types.
Yeah.
So it's just a very different. He's very different from anyone that they had in Baltimore. And this is, I mean, you talked about the ingredients, like they're very different from Baltimore. You know, like this is not an elite linebacking duo. I think it's an interesting one and could be better than people expect. But you know, there's no Roquan Smith there. There is, I think, outside of Witherspoon. I think that the secondary could be good. And then I think this defensive line, these DTs have the potential to be amongst the better DT groups in the NFL. Edge, I don't know, man, but the defensive line, I know. Like Leonard Williams, defense fell apart last year. Leonard Williams was not the problem. There's a reason why was it a good trade? No, because they were not a playoff team. But there's a reason why they paid to keep him. He was awesome last year. He was so disruptive. He was solid against the run as well. I think Byron Murphy adding to that group, then you can use, I'm curious to see how McDonald deploys Draymond Jones as well, who was like having to like play on the edge last year with Mosu out or whatever. Those players, like that group, and Reed, if it's anything like he was last year, that to me, Jackson, is really like the strength of this unit.
Well, they're going to have to be, because that's where they've allocated most of their resources.
That's
They
right.
gave Leonard Williams a huge contract. Last year, they made Draymond Jones the most expensive free agency acquisition in Seahawks history. And then they used a first-round pick to take Byron Murphy, the second defensive player, off the board. So, I mean, it has to be. And you mentioned the linebackers. You know, Dodson and Baker are those players who are a little bit analytical darlings. Like PFF graded them really well, but like PFF grades are based on when you're on the field. These are not guys who are playing 1,000 snaps, right? They're situational. It's the difference between Steph Curry and Kyle Korver, right? Like Steph Curry's a better shooter, but he has to create his own shot. He has to do everything. And you look, and Kyle Korver has a higher 3-point made percentage because he's coming off screens and getting open looks. They're dialing up plays for him. And I think with Dodson and Baker, that's kind of what it is. They were sub-package linebackers who are good in coverage. And that's where Seattle's weakness was. I mean, Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks were good tacklers, but I mean, teams just sliced them to death by forcing them to cover slot wide receivers. And so I think that's kind of the hope, but I don't think they're guys that are going to go stick their nose in between the defensive tackles and make a bunch of tackles for loss. So the interior of that defense is going to have to be really stout.
Yeah, I think the hope is for year one, because I think what you said at the beginning about how this is kind of like a diagnostic year for Mike McDonald is really true. But the hope for year one, the case for this Seahawks team is not too dissimilar from the Rams. What we just said, you want a top 8 offense and then an average defense is the playoff case. We'll get to the offense in a second. Whether or not this defense can be average, to me, a lot of it will depend on whether or not Mike McDonald can gin up a pass rush without having elite pass rushers. Now, that's what he did in Baltimore. It was they got so much pressure despite the fact that they, didn't have like that true dominant number one edge. I mean, Clowney was great for them. Odafe Owe flashed here and there, but Kyle Van Noy added some juice. But nobody would look at that group on paper and say that team is going to finish with one of the higher pressure rates in football. They did, in part because of the play he got out of this defensive tackles, and then, their use of simulated pressures, the way they were able to exploit offensive linemen to confuse quarterbacks. You had defensive tackles dropping into cover. Yeah, I mean, it was, we talked about simulated pressures a lot with this Baltimore Ravens defense last year. It's funny, Jackson, because Seattle actually tried to run a lot of simulated pressures last year and it didn't really work. So I think this question, can this defense be average? Some of it is going to come down to, can Mike McDonald make this front a little like manipulate or dictate to offenses the way he was able to do in Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that are going to have to change in order for that to happen. One, they have to be a lot more disciplined and a lot more willing tacklers. I mean, that Steelers loss on New Year's Eve last year that cost them the playoffs. Brutal. I mean, they just looked disinterested. in tackling anybody. And I think that was the game that cost Pete Carroll his job. They were 28th in DVOA. They were not the 28th most talented defense in the NFL. The other thing is schematically, they were a boring defense. And McDonald's defense is anything but. The thing, his defense reminds me, the way that he talks about it and the way that his players in Baltimore talk about the defense reminds me of how players talk about the Kyle Shanahan offense. It's almost binary, right? He's reducing it to ones and zeros. When the play starts, you see one key, and if it's 1, you go this way. If it's a 0, you go that way. And that takes some time to learn, but once you grasp that, it simplifies the game and it lets you play free and it lets you play fast. And we talked about how much pressure the Ravens generated. Only 5 teams blitzed less frequently than the Ravens did last year. They were not manufacturing pressure in the way that we think about it. And I think that the strengths of Seattle's defense do lend themselves to at least that possibility, because I think the most underrated aspect of creating pressure on a quarterback is not allowing him to throw to his first and second read. If you can get him to hold on to the football, and I think Seattle has the type of coverage guys to do that, and I think that they have the potential to create pressure. I mean, Uchenna Nwosu has shown himself to be a double-digit sack guy. Boye Mafe, when Nwosu was in there, set a franchise record with 7 consecutive games with a sack last year. Like, I think they can do it with the guys that they have, and if they do, I think it's going to take some of the pressure off of those linebackers.
I love what you said about the tackling, because I've been talking about the scheme, the simulated pressures, and they're going to, we'll see what they do in terms of disguise on the back end. But the other thing about the Ravens defense is they just tackle, man. Like that defense, it was such like a unique combination of schematic complexity and then just like hitting dudes. And I think that's needs to be what McDonald instills in this defense to have similar success.
Still got to hit dudes.
Still got to hit dudes, which again, it is, to your point, like very much the defensive version of the Niners in that regard, right? It's all this like beautiful complexity and different groupings and guys doing a bunch of stuff. They also just truck people.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. Also, we got to change coaching wise on the offense, though. Shane Waldron is gone. He's now with Chicago. We're talking about him. We're talking about the NFC North. Ryan Grubb from UW is the offensive coordinator. So the offense itself is pretty similar, except for Will Disley and Colby Parkinson are both gone, both in LA. Otherwise, quarterbacks, you got Sam Howell as a backup. Wide receivers the same. Fant they kept. The big change is the offensive line, which was a massive problem. I've talked about this to no end for the offense last year. They were just a sieve on third down, which basically made the third down offense non-functional. So the interior is gone. You got Laken Tomlinson at guard. I guess Anthony Bradford maybe would be starting in place of Haynes.
Sounds like it so far. Yeah. Sounds like he's way ahead of Christian Haynes so far, which is to be expected a weekend.
Yeah. He's a rookie. Yeah. So, and then you drafted Oluwatomi last year. But there's a lot of whispers that the Seahawks might sign Connor Williams, who is a very capable NFL center from Dallas, Miami. He was injured last season. Tackle, otherwise, pretty much the same. Charles Cross on the left side. Right side, we'll see if Abe Lucas plays. But they did bring back old friend / tight end George Fant, who is at minimum a competent NFL tackle. So
totally.
Let's start with Grubb, because I think that watching Ryan Grubb in that UW offense was like one of the most fun college football experiences of my lifetime. That thing was all gas, no brakes, chaos. But it wasn't like sometimes with college offenses, you watch that and you think that none of this would work in the NFL. It's just like
it's not Josh Heupel's offense.
That's the offense I was thinking of, right? Like, so no, that's not the case here. There's a lot of actually stuff you do see on Sundays from that UW offense. How would you describe what you've seen? How would you describe the Ryan Grubb offense, and how do you think that maps on to the players Seattle has?
Aggressive. I think that it is a very aggressive offense. And you watched UW last year. You saw that the offense wanted to dictate terms, and they did it relentlessly and they did it fearlessly. And a lot of that is confidence in your personnel. Now, kind of skipping over the good stuff here, the Washington Huskies had the number one offensive line in the NFL or in college football last year.
Half of them are in the NFL now,
and the rest will be. And we had Dave Mahler, softy from KJR, on last week, and I asked him. He's really close to the UW program, and I said, how much of that is recruiting and how much of that is coaching? And he said, it's coaching. I mean, yes, they have some good recruits, but I mean, Scott Huff is also coming from UW to the Seahawks with Ryan Grubb. He was their offensive line coach. So if he can get these guys coached up again, just be average, then I think we can get to the fun stuff with the Ryan Grubb offense, because I do think that the talent overlap is really strong. Let's start at quarterback. When Danny Kelly, who I think writes the best draft primer, certainly one of the best draft primers out there. He was texting with you and I about looking for a comp for Gino or for Michael Penix, and I said Geno Smith. He's left-handed Geno Smith. I see so many similarities in their games, and one of them is Geno Smith has reestablished himself as one of the best deep ball passers in the NFL, and it's borne out through the eye test. It's borne out statistically, and that's what Michael Penix excelled at. So much of what Ryan Grubb wants to do on offense is stretch the boundaries. He is not afraid to split his wide receivers way out from the offensive line. And the reason that more teams don't do that is because that's the toughest throw in football. If you can drop back on the left hash and throw a 20-yard out to the right sideline, that's almost a 50-yard throw. And you need to have a quarterback who can do it. Geno can do it. And then I think beyond that, you have a ton of overlap with receiver skill sets. I mean, he has been unapologetic in comparing DK Metcalf to Rome Odunze. And you've got JSN, who profiles like a Jalen Polk. And you've got Tyler Lockett, who profiles as a Jalen McMillan. I mean, this is very exciting. Those are three guys that all went in the first 2 days of the NFL draft and who appear to be very ready to play in the NFL. And so I think that's where it gets exciting.
I think what I want to see, because I agree with you especially about how the quarterback and the wide receivers kind of map onto them. What I want to see is, okay, but can you make this passing game a little bit more quarterback friendly than not just what we saw in UW, but what we saw last year with the Seahawks? I think Waldron did the best he could with a very non-functioning at times offensive line. And I think that was the number one thing that caused problems for an offense that finished 6th in passing DVOA, by the way. Let me repeat that. Yeah. The Seahawks offense was 6th overall in passing DVOA. They couldn't run the ball. So
no one wants to hear that, Mina.
Nope, nobody wants to hear that.
That doesn't fit the narrative.
But I do think things could have been easier for Geno, particularly like there were just at times I thought like this, he got me using we. They didn't use the middle of the field as much as like we were just talking about the Rams offense, and they're so good at using the middle of the field and getting you yards after the catch and taking advantage of run pass uncertainty. And I think that was sometimes an issue with the Seahawks offense. And so like I think that Washington offense, lived. They had so much success with like a very great screen game. And then there was like what you talked about, those very difficult throws, opposite hash. Michael Penix, whole shots. That's great in the NFL. I want to see drift. Like I want things to be easier for Geno Smith than they were last year. And then they were for Michael Penix, that's college. You're playing college defenses. And I think Grubb is capable of that. And I think Geno is better throwing over the middle of the field than Michael Penix. So I think some of that was him like playing to the skill set of the quarterback and the players. And I think I'm excited to see what he does in the NFL with these NFL receivers and how he compensates for if there are issues with the offensive line. I'm curious to see how he gets the run game looking better too. Like the Huskies, they weren't a run first, they were bombs away. But when defenses played the pass, when they faced them with like shell coverage, they were more than willing to run the ball. And they had a pretty creative and diverse run game with Dylan Johnson. Curious to see what that looks like as well. It's going to be really interesting. I will say, Jacson, everything I hear out of camp about the offense suggests that like all the offensive players seem to love whatever Grubb is doing. So
Yeah, I imagine it's a very welcome relief, especially to the playmakers. The one thing that Grubb is inheriting that he didn't have at UW is a lot of juice in the backfield with Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Dylan Johnson got the job done, but he wasn't breaking games open. I will say, one of the things I look for the most in a coordinator isn't how good your scheme is, isn't how high level you are intellectually. It's can you counterpunch? Because teams are going to figure you out. They're going to figure out over the course of the season. They're going to figure out over the course of the game. And it didn't seem like Shane Waldron was able to counterpunch. Didn't seem like he really had a plan for when there was pressure coming up the middle. And I do want to say one thing about the pressure. And I'm so glad that you brought up Seattle's passing DVOA to speak to just how competent, how good I think Geno Smith has become. Is you remember the game when Seattle sacked the Giants 11 times on Monday Night Football? Right? Franchise record sacks in a game.
4 days after Nino was born.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You talk about setting him up for the wrong expectations with his defense. But my point is the pressure percentage that Seattle created in that game. Remember, 11 sacks.
Yeah.
Was 46%. The pressure percentage that Geno Smith faced with Abe Lucas out last year all season was 45%. He dealt with the same level of pressure all season long that the Giants did in that game with the 11 sacks and the 3 points scored. So that's how good Geno Smith was despite the adversity. But all roads lead back to this offensive line. And we saw in 2022, Geno threw over the middle very effectively because he could step into his throws. Last year, those plays were out of the playbook. He couldn't step into his throws. The middle of his line is getting pushed back into his lap on every play.
He still found ways. I mean, the Steelers game is one that gets brought up, like even against pressure, but yeah, it was non-functional.
His game against Dallas, I mean, he was touching the face of God for 3.5 hours.
You're talking about the pass protection. The run game as well. The run blocking was really atrocious, particularly on the right side. In fact, Seahawks were dead last in adjusted line yards running behind the right tackle last year. So this is that is sort of the where things started with this offense and end. Like if the offensive line is just functional, this offense could be one of the best in the NFL. However, that's a big if, and I think we both agree. Like that's it's wild to me. Injury, yeah.
You said it's wild to me that he's probably one of the 5 most important players on this team. Like their offense was literally almost twice as good from an EPA standpoint when he's on the field over the last 2 years than when he wasn't.
Nice. Not nice. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. All right, we are back. We started by saying, the expectations for the Rams were very low going into last year. The Cardinals, not only did they seem to be outright tanking for Caleb Williams, they had, I thought, one of the most dubious rosters I've seen in quite some time.
Yes.
And the fact that they ended up playing as well as they did, as hard as they did, despite having such a young roster, very hard schedule, 5th hardest, was honestly pretty shocking. And there's a couple of things come out of that. Defensively, they were wacky, they were weird, they were still bad. We'll talk about that. Offensively, I want to start there because I think that's the optimistic case for this team being interesting and fun. If you're a Cardinals fan, to me, starts with this offense, building on what you saw in the second half of the season when Kyler Murray came back. So in the second half of the year, this team could run the ball not just as well as any team in football, but better than any team. Now, they did get the benefit of playing Seattle, Philly, Dallas, or Dallas was actually earlier. That was the first early in the year when they won. They played some sus run defenses, to be sure. But I'm telling you, watching them, it's not smoke and mirrors with this team running the football. In the second half of the year, they were first in EPA per play running the ball.
Crazy.
More than twice as efficient as the San Francisco 49ers in EPA per play, which is bananas. They were good at everything. They were second in first downs per carry. They were third in yards after contact. They were fourth in yards before contact per carry. Kyler Murray looked great with the ball in his hands. But I just want to take a minute to shout out James Conner. Dude, I feel like he's one of the most underrated players.
Yes.
I just said that about Gino recently. But I've been seeing all these lists come in, like best running backs, Madden running backs, and he's not on any of them. That's crazy to me. I think he's such a complete back. And by the way, I know, some of those stats are talking about like the blocking and the scheme, how that helps him. He was fourth in rushing yards over expected per carry. Yeah. So that's just him. And I thought he was awesome.
What, 28, right? When he's supposed to be over the cliff. I mean, James Conner's the man. He reminds me of D'Angelo Williams a lot. You remember him with the Panthers and then with the Steelers? Like, just does everything well. Coach's dream. You can trust him to protect your quarterback. You can trust him to catch the ball when you throw it to him. He's not going to fumble. He's going to get everything that's blocked for him, and then he's going to get stuff that's not blocked for him, and you don't got to take him off the field. Like, James Conner's the man.
I fear for Seahawks fans that this run game will be even better this year, or as good. I mean, I guess
absolutely will with a healthy Kyler.
Healthy Kyler Murray. Continued investment in the offensive line. You got Paris Johnson moving to the left side, Jonah Williams at right tackle, which I don't know why it wasn't his whole thing. He wanted to play at left tackle. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. They drafted a blocking tight end, Tip Raymond. You add another very fun young running back, Trey Benson. And because of the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr., who I thought was the correct pick for them at 4. Defenses do have to fear the pass a little bit more. So, that's going to make it easier for them to run, and also going to make it easier for Marvin Harrison Jr. Because I'm telling you, every defensive coordinator that plays this team is worried about stopping the run. That is job number 1 versus the Arizona Cardinals in 2024. And Marvin Harrison Jr. should benefit from that.
Oh, no question. This team is going to be really, really frisky this year. Like, I think that this year is going to be one of those seasons where we see them be a lot more competitive than their Vegas lines would suggest. And they're going to finish 2024 the way that the Lions finished 2023 or 2022, where it's like, okay, they've been bad for a long time. They've kind of been a punchline. And then, okay, Dan Campbell's got something cooking here. Yeah. And then the next year they come out and they beat the defending champs in opening day and they make a run to the NFC Championship game. I'm not saying the Cardinals get there that quick, but I think there's going to be really similar vibes as we see this team grow together and come together. And, for all the jokes we all made about Jonathan Gannon at the beginning of last year, he had a bad team playing really hard for him.
Yeah. Playing hard. And I think, his choices of coaches also panned out. So again, we'll get to the defense in a second, which is where the case for the Cardinals kind of falls apart for me. But offensively, I thought Drew Petzing, this is about as radical of a transformation from the Cliff Kingsbury offense as it gets. This was a team that loved putting multiple tight ends on the field, most 13 personnel, 3 tight ends in football. Up there in 12. I think that's going to go up even more, or at least be as high this year. And he had Kyler.
So, even with adding Marvin Harrison, you think they still go tight end heavy?
Imagine this 12 personnel grouping. It's Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, who I thought was pretty good for them.
I like Michael Wilson.
Trey McBride, who's like this ascending, going to be one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And then, I don't know, if you put in Tip Ryman. It's kind of funny because Kyler's a quarterback. That is like the biggest grouping.
Totally.
Dude, like Marv is huge. Okay. Yeah. Wilson is probably 6'2".
Yeah.
Like that's a big boy offense. And they're going to get in there and they're going to run the damn ball.
James Conner's big for a running back too.
James Conner's big.
They got beef.
They got beef. And then little Greg Dortch, who I like. I love that they have such an identity, it's funny. Like I just love teams where you look at them, you're like, you look at the Bills and you just know what they want to do. And it creates such problems for teams like the Eagles, like the Seahawks, like the Cowboys. There's all these finessey defenses out there and who don't have like stout linebacking groups. And this team, I'm telling you, is going to run it down their throats. Now, whether or not the offense is, and they actually finished decent in DVOA overall, but whether or not they're actually really good, I think depends on, Kyler sort of another year removed from his injury, playing a little bit closer to what he did in 2021. So I do want to ask, like, what kind of before we move to the defense, what you saw out of him. I thought I was looking at his splits, and I think they captured something that I really saw. So they're really interesting. He was 28th in QBR when kept clean, but 6th under pressure. He was 20th in the pocket, but 4th outside the pocket. He was 22 when he was unblitzed, but 2nd versus the blitz. So basically, as a playmaker, he was good, and you really saw that in the Eagles game, but you didn't see that consistency from inside the pocket that I think they're going to need.
Yeah, and that's where interior pressure is going to come in huge for the teams that play against the Cardinals, because blitz at your own risk with Kyler Murray, and especially when you have one receiver that has already proven that he's a very effective safety valve in Trey McBride, and then you're adding a receiver that there is no reason to believe is going to have a very short runway to being excellent in the NFL. I don't see any reason that Marvin Harrison doesn't live up to billing immediately. And the other thing is, I just love Kyler Murray. I mean, you know, I think
still a fan. Like, let's get into that a little bit, because
I am still a fan, and I think last year was kind of vindicating for the team. I never thought trading Kyler was a serious thing. I thought it would be really stupid if they did it, but I know that, you know, a lot of folks said, you know, you got to trade this guy. Oh, there's the video game clause in his contract, and there's no way he's going to be worth all of this money, and we'll see. But look, this team was 1-8 and 26th in points per game without him, and they went 4-4 with the worst defense in the NFL and without any good NFL wide receivers. Like, we like Dortch and we like Michael Wilson, but they're not scaring anybody.
Yeah,
and they went 4-4 and they jumped to 9th in points per game. And Kyler Murray was not the Kyler Murray that we know that he can be. It seems like he has taken the criticism very seriously, is applying himself more. This guy was, I mean, he's one of those dudes, pick his sport. He was going to be amazing at it. He chose football. And I think that he got serious enough about being the quarterback and being the face of the franchise. He was voted a team captain unanimously by his teammates going into last year before he'd even taken a snap. And he came in and took immediate command of a bad offense and turned them into a top 10 offense. And I see no reason why they're not even better this year. I think Kyler Murray is excellent, but to your point, you kind of have to treat him the way the defenses started to treat Russell Wilson from 2017, 2018 on, where it's like, get your pressure, but don't overcommit to this guy. Keep him in the pocket. Don't let him escape. Make him make that throw. And I think that's how you beat Kyler.
Yeah. I think he showed enough to me in the second half of last season for there to be some optimism going into this year, especially with the offensive coordinator, the additions that they've made, talked about the guys they've drafted, and then just him being removed from the injury again. So I think the Cardinals offense is going to be fun, frisky. I like that. That was a good word. I can't get there with the defense, man. This is rough. This is a rough group. I'm just looking at this depth chart, and you know, last year it was,
and they just lost BJ Ojulari
too.
Which was like their like bright shining.
Yeah, future. Like, hey, you got some flashes out of BJ Ojulari. Their defensive coordinator's name is Nick Rallis. God bless that dude, because he was just plugging holes. Well, so actually you had Budda Baker running around there like a fireman, trying to just like desperately put out, just throwing water on everything. Yeah. This is a really funky defense. I don't think I've actually gotten into this, but they played the most space in the NFL. They played the most quarters, a lot of 5-man fronts, just Budda Baker running around, doing their best is how I would describe it. It did not work. They also ranked 3rd in rush 3 rate. They were 31st versus the pass, 30th versus the run, but it's pretty hard. They were so bad. It's hard to hold that though against any of the coaches, because they were, again, really doing the best with what they had. And they did make some additions. You bring in like some capable veterans. You draft Darius Robinson, who, I think is more of like a 3-tech type. He's kind of like a big power.
Yeah, he wasn't really my guy coming out of this draft, but there was so much edge talent off the board. by the time they took him. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but they added Sean Murphy-Bunting. He's coming off a bad season, but he was excellent with Tampa Bay. Bilal Nichols, Justin Jones, Mac Wilson. I mean, they're trying.
Kaiser White is my friend Greg Rosenthal. I always have an inside joke where he thinks he's really good, and I'm always pushing back. But he's one of the better players in the defense. Safety duo is good, Buda and Jalen Thompson. But the corners and edges, this is just a bottom.
Is Kaiser Greg Rosenthal's Emir Smith-Marset for Nate?
Yeah, everybody's got that one player where you're just like, I still believe. Yeah,
Duke Johnson was that for me.
I just the optimistic case. I think so you want your young players, you want to feel like you have a core. I think the most optimistic case for this team, though, is just that they run the ball so damn well that the defense isn't on the field that much, right. And they're able to kind of control the pace of games. And I think you want to see Kyler again take that step forward and get a little bit closer to 2021. But I like what you're doing, Arizona. I just think we're still a little bit early in this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the optimism for Cardinals fans is, there's a lot to like about the approach they're taking with building. I mean, geez, they have 6 picks in the first 90 draft slots this year. They're young. Jonathan Gannon didn't come out of nowhere. He was the defensive coordinator for a very, very good Eagles defense when he was there. I got to imagine that there's some regression towards the mean coming for that defense. Hopefully the rookies grow into something competent, but they're also kind of timing this well. I think the other 3 teams in the division are pretty good. So this is a pretty good time to be bad because, I don't think the 49ers championship window is closing, but their current contractual flexibility window is closing and they're going to have to adapt. The Rams are getting old with their 2 best players. Their 3 best players, one of them's gone because he got too old. And then the others are old. They're in their 30s with Stafford and Kupp. So I think there's a window there, and who freaking knows with the Seahawks. So, I mean, I think if the Cardinals do start building momentum, 25, 26,
agree.
I think there's some room in this division.
You just need edges and corners, but I guess Zaven Collins, I saw they paid. He's kind of a tweener guy. He showed something a little bit. I think we're both pretty optimistic about this offense, and the offense is a little bit ahead of schedule relative to defense. That's all.
Do you think, real quick, do you think that this division is the best offensive division in the NFL?
Yeah.
I could see all 4 teams being in the top 12 in DVOA.
Yeah, it's NFC North, AFC North, NFC West. NFC North is close. AFC North, if you got Ravens, Bengals. We'll see what. Well, I guess that's a good transition because the Steelers, if they acquire Brandon Aiyuk, I'm going to be pretty.
Check the phone. Has it happened yet?
Nothing's happened yet. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about.
Come on, Pittsburgh
offense. I mean, well, it's actually this is because the Niners offense is so unbelievably dominant. It's almost like there's not that much to talk about with them. I had a couple thoughts on, what we might see this year, but it's the same group basically. Everything's the same. They were the best offense in football. They were unbelievable at everything. There's no reason to think it won't be the same, especially if they keep
best roster in the NFL with great coaches.
Best roster, great coaches. The only concern I have about this offense, other than losing Aiyuk, which we can talk about, assuming they keep Aiyuk, and and that's still on the table, they get a deal done, pay him, is just injuries, which again, you can say that about any offense, but I do think is particularly pertinent here because last year, the Niners were the 4th healthiest team in the NFL. And a lot of players, not a lot of players, but some of the players who had injury history in the past, Williams, Christian McCaffrey, you got a full season out of him.
Kittle.
Yeah. Having that whole group together, it's unstoppable. But, it's totally plausible that they're not as lucky injury wise this season. Williams is the only one I think they truly can't afford to lose. We were joking. So
no, please finish that thought.
So Niners fans, You can never accuse us of being homers because we're literally saying you're the best offense in football. You're dominant, whatever. We love Kyle Shanahan. That said, Trent Williams, man, get every dollar you're worth, King.
Take your time, brother. Take your time. You know what? Talk to your teammates. Get your teammates,
they need you more than you need them.
All these guys, man. Just figure it out. Preserve the health. There's no need to rush this, fellas.
You've already got the Hall of Fame locked in. You're fine. Just you're getting up in the years.
Can I give you a hot Trent Williams take?
Oh God, what is it?
If I had a vote, he would have been my MVP last year.
Yeah, it's a great take.
The 49ers were 12-2 with him, scoring 32 points a game. They were 0-3 without him, with all this talent, with Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, Christian McCaffrey and Aiyuk and Debo and Kittle and that offensive line. Trent Williams went down. They went 0-3, scored 17 points in every single game.
Okay, so I think this. So Williams, I think we both agree, is the one guy they can't lose on this team.
Yep.
I'm including every position. He is the one guy. In part because their offensive line outside of him is not great. And that's just, this was an issue you saw in the Super Bowl when, there was an injury there, but you saw against Chris Jones and a very good chief defensive line. And against, like the Browns, for example, as well, the Ravens to some extent. How do you feel about Aiyuk? Because
just like in general?
No, like if you take Aiyuk out of this, so I think we agree if Aiyuk stays, if Williams is healthy, unless injuries are the only thing holding this offense back. Let's say, so there's a few at the moment. By the time this comes out, I feel like this is going to be resolved. But there's a few options on the table for Aiyuk. The three teams you're hearing him being linked to are the Patriots, the Steelers, and the Browns.
All AFC.
All AFC. Well, I think it'll be AFC no matter what because it's a Super Bowl team. The Browns are the only one with an elite wide receiver to send back to the Niners. That would be Amari Cooper, which I find fascinating from the Browns' perspective. And I'll talk about that when I talk about the AFC North, because I think Aiyuk is a better player, but it's not like I think Amari Cooper's quite good too. So it's interesting to me that they're interested in doing that because whoever is training for Aiyuk is going to give him a big contract. So I think there's two possibilities. One, the Niners don't have Aiyuk. Ricky Pearsall has to take let's say they do one of the teams like the Patriots. I guess they would get Kendrick Bourne, or the Steelers, who knows. But in that scenario, I think Ricky Pearsall has to play a bigger role and you're getting draft picks. In the other scenario, you're getting Amari Cooper. How important would you say Aiyuk is to this offense, and how big of an impact do you think it would be for the Niners to lose him, though they might get Cooper?
No Aiyuk, no Cooper. This is probably still a top 8 offense, top 6 offense. It's disgusting. They have so many options. They're just going to lean into other guys more. Yeah. We haven't even mentioned Deebo Samuel yet, who's like one of my 10 favorite players in the entire NFL. Kittle is one of my 10 favorite players in the NFL. It's so frustrating to have a team in the same division as a team that is so good and has so many likable players. But, I think they're still good. And I think Shanahan is the type of coach that can overcome it. But there is a ceiling with Brandon Aiyuk that doesn't exist without him. Brandon Aiyuk averaged 13 yards per target last year. And this wasn't on 50 gimmicky targets. This is on triple-digit targets, 13 yards a target. Like, that's a level of efficiency that even if he stays, it's going to regress some. But, like, it's so far in the top right quadrant of the graph that he can regress significantly. A standard of deviation and still be one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL. That's how good he was last year. So I do think he opens up everything else. I think the team is worse without him, for sure.
Yeah, he's also so important now that you have a quarterback who's willing to throw deep and outside the numbers in Brock Purdy. I mean, whatever you think of Purdy, there's a big difference between him and Jimmy Garoppolo. He will use more of the football field. Garoppolo 100%. Never threw outside the numbers, right? And Aiyuk is that guy. I mean, if you just look at passes outside the numbers, overwhelming target share, led the NFL in yards per route run on those throws. He has the ability to win at all 3 levels. He can stack corners. He can get yards after the catch. He can make difficult catches. Like, that's a big loss. I will say, Amari, I think, is quite good and quite underrated. So different type of receiver, but similarly incredible route runner. That would be an interesting add.
I think with Aiyuk, he does the same thing to defenses. If I can torture another NBA analogy that like a Damian Lillard or Steph Curry does, when you have to guard someone 30 feet from the basket because they might make that shot, you are creating so much more space between defenders. And I think that's what Aiyuk does to a defense is he stretches out the space between the defenders, which opens things up for Debo and Kittle and McCaffrey.
They're Giannis. The problem is Dame's like not as good as it used to be. So the vision you're a Dame guy, but the vision of what the Bucks would have been with Giannis and Dame is what the Niners are, which is you got this unbelievable 21 personnel grouping. You kill team. You have to stack the box against defense. Oh, by the way, they also have a top 6 or 7 receiver in the NFL who can win deep and downfield too. The stress it puts on your defense from a spacing perspective is immense. I think this would be a huge L for the Niners. Obviously, it would be a huge L even if you get Cooper back. But you're a Super Bowl team. Like, it sucks that, you couldn't, if it were to happen. It might not happen. By the time you're listening to this, Brandon Aiyuk might still be a Niner. I have no feel for it. I have said all along, if I was the Niners, I wouldn't trade him. I would get it done. Obviously, there's contractual complexity there with the Brock Purdy extension looming.
Can we talk about, just for like 2 minutes, can we talk about the timing of this? And how big of a fumble this would be for the 49ers to end up trading Aiyuk, but not to get draft picks this year for him?
Yeah, especially if it's
Super Bowl window.
The Steelers or the Patriots. I mean, there's no way they would have gotten the Drake May pick, but it's
right. I know. Like I think the 49ers competitive window is open for a few more years, but they have enjoyed a lot of salary cap flexibility. And I want to circle back to this, but it reminds me very much of the 2014 Seahawks transitioning into the 2015 and 2016 Seahawks, when all of a sudden, all of those guys who were giving you all pro performance for deep discounts needed to get paid. That's hard. And you're coming off of a lot of deep playoff runs. Your off seasons are shorter. You have had more reps. It is tiring on these guys, and losing 2 Super Bowls like that in 4 years, losing those 2 NFC championship games the way they did with the dropped interception in overtime and then Brock Purdy getting hurt. I mean, that's a lot of heartbreak and short off seasons to get over it.
What a shame. All right, the defense. It's funny because we're kind of being a little bit homers, but like I think our level of fear and respect is pretty obvious. Totally. And that extends to the defense. Defense that was great last year. This is the unit though where there's a little bit more change. Eric Armstead is gone. Dre Greenlaw is injured. He obviously got injured during the Super Bowl. So those are question marks. You do get Talanoa Hufanga back. And then they drafted Renardo Green. I think Diamador Lenoir is going to be in the slot for them. I think they drafted Malik Mustafa, who's a safety I like too. So I think the secondary could be better, and I think the front could be a little bit worse. And I think the net will be that the defense will still be extremely good.
Well, yeah, they'll still be extremely good. But Nick Bosa wasn't Nick Bosa last year, and is he going to be Nick Bosa? That was good enough to hold out for that monster contract and then played like he had missed training camp. Is he going to be back to being that guy? They lost Javon Kinlaw. They lost Eric Armstead. They lost Chase Young and Randy Gregory. And
I know. These players, I'm like, Armstead though. Armstead, I think, is actually an impactful loss. I was grabbing his on-off numbers. So this was a defense that sucked against the run last year, right? Armstead on first down, when he was on, they allowed 3.2 yards per carry. When he was off, it was 4.8. Went from negative 0.11 EPA per play to 0.03. And that's the first down. So, I'm trying to isolate for situation. They did add Malik Collins, but I think that's a loss that could be, especially Javon Hargrave is more of he was better as a pass rusher than a run defender, still very good. But that's, when you're talking about the Detroit Lions and some of these teams that can run the ball,
We saw that. We saw them struggle in the playoffs with the Packers and the Lions.
Yes.
That was, if you were going to have a chance to beat this team, that is how you had to do it. And so, I mean, but look, this is a team that was fourth in defensive DVOA last year. They have margin for error to be worse and still be very good, just like their offense.
You have the best linebacker of my lifetime in Fred Warner, who's talk about Kittle.
He's entering the conversation. Yeah,
probably one of my favorite defensive players to watch of all time. But he enables so much of what they do. I do think the coaching change is interesting here. Steve Wilks is gone. It's interesting because I think people will kind of point to a philosophical difference. I guess to my eye, I didn't think the Niners defense looked that different, but I think I have heard beat reporters talking about how they felt some of the struggles to defend the run had to do with what he was asking of the linebackers and whatnot. So we'll see if they went in-house to Nick Sorensen, not related to Daniel Sorensen. That confuses me every time. And then they added Brandon Staley, who, I will say this, whatever you think about Brandon Staley as a head coach, that dude is a very good individual game planner. So for him to join a Super Bowl team, I actually think that's a sneaky addition, because this is a team that's going to be playing in January and potentially February. And so the ability to come up with bespoke game plans to bedevil some of the better offenses in the NFL, you might see that influence a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. This team is still awesome. They just have so much top end talent. It's crazy. They have so many players who are top 10 at their position, and a coach that is excellent at maximizing that. What I think is going to be really interesting with their defensive staff is, some head coaches have juice and they have vibes. Pete Carroll had it. Dan Campbell is vibes personified, right? Even Mike McDaniel, in his own weird way, has vibes, right? That the team kind of feeds off of. Kyle Shanahan is negative vibes. That dude is an automaton, hat pulled low, flat brim, play sheet up in front of his face. He has relied on his defensive coordinators to help provide that juice. And he had it in DeMeco Ryans. He had it in Robert Saleh. And then Steve Wilks was up in the booth. Steve Wilks wasn't down there with the guys. He wasn't slapping shoulder pads. He was eye in the sky, felt like a more detached, analytical approach to the defense. They were still very good, but I'm curious to see if they get some of that juice back on the sidelines, because this is still a team that's coming out. First two dudes you see coming out of the locker room, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel. They got Kodak Black playing on the boombox. This is a juice forward team with the roster, and I'm curious to see if the defensive coordinators this year keep that going.
Juice forward. I like that. That's how I like my breakfast spots, to be juice forward. Yeah, I'm still very optimistic about them. I mean, I mentioned Hufanga. I thought Jair Brown was good for them. Javarius Ward, I picked as an all-pro. This is still an unbelievable group. I just not so sure about that run defense. That's all.
I agree.
And then I think, getting Greenlaw back will be huge.
Have you heard when he's coming back?
I have not, but that injury was so late, it's ooh. And then I think Devondre Campbell, he's competing with someone younger. It's and the best version of, as great as Fred Warner is, having Greenlaw there is, man, they found some really unbelievable linebackers. This team,
it's Bowman and Willis,
Yeah, it's a nightmare. Okay, so I think we both still agree that regardless of what happens with Brandon Aiyuk, they remain the number one team in the division. Yes. Do you go Niners, Rams, Seahawks, Cardinals?
I don't. I go Niners, Seahawks, Rams, Cardinals, but I'm bucketing the Seahawks and the Rams together. They had the same record as each other last year. The Rams were a much better team, but they had the same record as each other, and the Rams lost their best player. And I think the Seahawks have a lot of continuity on their roster from a 9-win team last year, and it's just gotta be better coaching.
No, you're fair. And that's not, I don't think that's Homerish at all.
I hope at this point, people listening, I say this all the time. I'm a football fan first and a Seahawks fan second. I hope that's coming through. I don't think you could tell me the Rams are a little bit better than the Seahawks. You tell me the Seahawks are a little bit better than the Rams. I have a hard time making a case that either one is way better than the other.
I have a hard time believing that losing the best defensive player of my lifetime will not have a bigger impact than maybe people think. As much as we love the shiny new thing and the draft picks, like y'all, not even usually when you lose a player like that, like JJ Watt in Arizona, retiring, like there's decline in play. Aaron Donald was still like one of the 3 best defensive tackles in football. There's no decline. The decline never came. Nope. Our long national nightmare is over.
Our regional one, at least.
Regional one. I love how Geno Smith has continuously gone on the record, by the way, to say that wasn't me who screamed, "Oh my God." He keeps saying that wasn't me. But it's the idea of a quarterback screaming that is so funny. Okay, well, you are not a homer, but you do a great job of covering the Seahawks. So
thank you.
For those who would like to hear more of Jackson's Seahawks coverage, check out his podcast. It is excellent. A lot of the people that we've mentioned, including friends of this show, will go on there every now and then to talk Seahawks and whatnot. I'm excited to follow this team this year and to see what happens, because all these coaching changes is really interesting. And I just, for the first time, it's like, oh, I don't know what this is going to look like. And I'm kind of scared, but kind of excited. So we'll see.
Yeah, me too. And I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, please come check out the show. I mean, we talk about the Seahawks mostly, but it's through the lens of the entire NFL. And love to have you guys come check us out.
Awesome.